Was there a question in the back?
Yeah, Jerry, I have a question for you. Just as you know, the fraction of American youths working has declined a lot. In 2000, about 2/3 of them worked in the summer. These are 18 to 24-year-olds. And now it's down to about half. And it had declined like 10 percentage points even before the current recession. So by like 2007, it was way down. So we have about 18 million now American-born kids, 16 to 24, not working each summer. And that's up, pretty steadily for the last 20 years. You mentioned in your report, I wonder, and we'd heard anecdotal stories, can you mention about what the research shows about people who don't work when they're young? What happens to them later in life, particularly those who don't go on to college?
I think Jeff and Sarah both spoke very well on that very point. If you don't acquire the skills of showing up, taking orders, working with the team, understanding how to deal with unruly customers, if you don't develop those skills as a kid, the studies show that you're at a disadvantage when you're an adult. And I think some longitudinal studies have shown that that disadvantage persists for many, many years. I mean, the phrase I've used is that by disenfranchising kids from the workplace, we're eating our own seed corn. As Sarah and Jeff were saying, these kids are our future, and as Sarah was saying, gosh, I'm a product of the 60s when parents thought we were all going to hell in a handbasket. Well, I'm not going to say we did okay, but we at least survived. And we are invested in these kids, and nothing against the foreign kids. I mean, the ones I met, I would say 98% of them I thought were wonderful kids. And it's great for the sponsors to brag about how they're preparing the kids for international competition in a globalized world. Okay, but if the American kids are being shoved aside, do we have any responsibility to them in a job program run by our own government at a time of record unemployment? I just think it's a program that has been, it's been overwhelmed by the monetary influences and powers in league with a State Department that combines very good intentions with visa diploma and very bad management. It's a toxic combination.
Peggy?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to ask, too. There seems to be such a disconnect between all the moaning and groaning in May and June when American kids aren't finding summer jobs again, and this whole issue of the foreign kids being brought in for summer jobs. I did some investigation in Rehoboth this summer, and by the way, I think there must be a qualification that every one of those kids have to be gorgeous, because I never saw so many beautiful kids as the ones working in every single ice cream store in Rehoboth. But and nice, you just can't complain about them at all.
Right.
And the churches were starting to get involved because they were worried about abuse of them. But none of them are talking about the American kids who aren't being employed. And I wondered, Sarah, too, is there any way of getting some of these churches involved, who are concerned about kids, American kids who don't have anything to do, kind of thing. But how can you explain that disconnect?
The churches in Ocean City have done a really great job, too. And I think they responded to the need as they saw it. They saw a lot of kids who were sent over here by sponsors who promised them jobs, and there was no job when they got here. And these kids were without food, without a place to stay. They were in desperate circumstances, and you needed good Samaritans to step in. But that is a very dramatic need of large groups of people. The American kids are unemployed in ones and twos, and they're dispersed throughout society. The need of the foreign kids was concentrated and dramatic. And concentrated and dramatic is going to win every time.
I want to add 2 footnotes, if I may. First of all, as you may notice, I'm probably the oldest person in the room at 83, and I have a selfish interest in the part of the Treasury that doesn't get the money, and I want to give you a couple of numbers on that. We were talking about Social Security Trust Fund, we were talking about the Medicare Trust Fund and the Unemployment Fund. If you take the industry's own calculation, as shown by Jerry's picture, that little machine that worked out the savings for the employers, and if you also take into account the fact that the employees, the foreign employees, don't pay Social Security taxes either, It turns out that there's a $79 million loss every year to the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare and the Unemployment Insurance Fund. $79 million a year. And these funds are in trouble, and it's not appropriate, I think, that they should continue to be in trouble because of the tax break that these employers and these students get. So that's a number. And one of the things that we might think about in terms of the question from the lady from Baltimore is the elderly interest group, particularly AARP, that should be paying attention to this issue, and at the moment does not seem to be.
This, by the way, is David North. If anyone does any research on immigration and labor issues back to the Johnson administration, you're going to find testimony and research by David North. And David, actually, you did a calculation of what the hit is to those trust funds. Yeah, yeah, okay.
So let's take one more question, Jared, and so respect people's time.
Jerry Kammer, a former immigration adjudicator. I was wondering about one aspect of this thing. In as much as these visas are promoted under a cultural exchange program of the State Department, to what extent anybody has kind of put pressure on the State Department to show to what extent exchange is happening, to consider whether one way of controlling the abuses of the system as it now exists would be to demands some measure of parity between the U.S. students going abroad to take advantage of cultural opportunities there and the number of people now doing scut work in every medium-sized town in our own country.
Yeah. I think that's a structural issue. First, these kids to come in SWT need to be able to speak English. And there are not too many American kids who speak Moldovan or Romanian or Chinese or Portuguese for Brazil, or who are thereby qualified to go to work in those countries, and there are not many who are willing to work at the prevailing local wage for unskilled labor. I should point out that there was one recommendation by the GAO back in 1990 that some of these jobs, because they were so clearly scut work and had nothing to do with real educational or cultural exchange, that they be put off limit. Congress stepped in and intervened with legislation basically saying, hands off, it's okay for these kids to do these jobs as part of the cultural exchange. I think it's in the report. I believe it was sometime in the 1990s when there was a suggestion to limit the program, and Congress came in, I believe, influenced by the lobby, and if you look at the literature, it suggests that the lobby was really active at that time. Congress responded and protected the availability of these kids to these jobs that GAO thought were inappropriate.
Sarah, you have any thoughts on this reciprocity idea? It seems sort of common sense. On the other hand, you would only end up getting students from France and Germany and Italy, and obviously we wouldn't be taking a lot of Ukrainians because there's not a lot of Americans lining up to sweep streets by hand in Kiev or whatever it is they do there in the summer.
In terms of a true cultural exchange, I think it'd be a great idea, but I think the practical logistics of it would make it not feasible. As Jerry has pointed out, language skills simply don't exist in this country. Kids speak English and that's it. To me, what this summer work program has become is essentially tourism with a paycheck. These kids are allowed to come and work and experience the United States, which I think is a great thing, but at what price? If my kid wants to go overseas, he can't work in France or in Germany or in Argentina or Australia. They can go and visit. And our younger son was fortunate to go on an international exchange program to Australia last summer for middle school students. And he spent 2 weeks there and absolutely loved it. And our younger son is the one who's going to be the gypsy and the traveler. He's going to be the one that goes to all of these wonderful places in the world and maybe even work there. But I don't see a sort of a tit for tat or equal exchange as being feasible, in addition to which the United States market is simply so much larger. I think really Congress needs to revisit the rules and regulations that govern the J program. I was surprised when I did look up the regs, because it used to be that it was the exchange student visa. It's now called the exchange visitor visa. There's a big difference. When I was in grad school, it was a program that was set up for mostly kids from the third world, not wealthy countries who were in the United States working on their graduate degrees to prevent the brain drain, and so that they would go back to their own countries and take that knowledge back and bring their own countries up in terms of their economic standing and development. Now it's significantly expanded. I can see how an au pair is part of an exchange, because you're living with an American family for an extended period and you're learning about it. A friend of mine who's an American citizen has German citizen granddaughters, and one of her granddaughters came and worked for an American family for about 6 months as an au pair. And that was a true exchange. Even though it was relatively unskilled labor, I can see that. But camp counselors?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, that just doesn't ring true to me. And certainly not washing dishes and working on a factory line at unskilled labor jobs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Jerry, you have any last comments?
Boy, I don't know. I think it's a program with good intentions that's had bad management. State is facing up to it now. I'm really sorry to see that Rick Ruth has left the office in which he was attempting to lead the reform. There's going to be a battle, perhaps, over the proposed regulation that Mr. Ruth has come up with to redesign to some limited extent the program. There will be pushback from the industry. And we will see what happens once the period for public comment begins. That will be after state publishes its proposed regulations for this program.
Well, thank you.
In coming weeks.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Jeff and Sarah Ann as well. I think those of us physically in the room are willing to hang around and be accosted afterwards, and I think we have Sarah's contact information for anybody who wants it. So again, thank you for coming, and hope to see you at our next event.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the studies used in this video and others, please visit www.cis.org.